China conquered the British automotive market through the back door. While the headlines across Westminster were dominated by heated political debates on net zero targets, trade tariffs, and solemn promises of green reindustrialisation, the most radical transformation in the history of British transport was unfolding silently on our motorways. If you observe the daily traffic flow across London, Manchester, Birmingham, or Edinburgh today, the image that executives from traditional Western car makers try to project is one of complete market stability, where century-old legacy brands still dictate the rules of the game. But the moment you lift the bonnet of the latest electric vehicles, inspect the underlying chassis architecture, examine the thermal management modules, and investigate the chemical composition of the energy cells, the reality is stark, undeniable, and deeply uncomfortable. The technological soul of these vehicles is no longer European or Japanese. It is 100% Chinese. The most astonishing evidence of this industrial capitulation did not come from an aggressive Chinese upstart trying to carve out market share through bargain prices. It came from the company that was, for nearly half a century, the global benchmark for manufacturing perfection, uncompromising reliability, and engineering sovereignty, Toyota. To avoid being completely wiped out of the British and European electric vehicle landscape following the disappointing debut of its early standalone electric models, the world's largest car maker took a decision that would have been unthinkable just 5 years ago. Toyota signed a deep strategic alliance with BYD, effectively surrendering the technological core and propulsion architecture of its new electric lineup to its fiercest Asian rival. The British consumer walks into a local dealership believing they are investing in legendary Japanese engineering, but what they are actually driving home is a Chinese Trojan horse on wheels. To grasp the true magnitude of this global seismic shift, one must understand that post-Brexit Britain became the ultimate proving ground and gateway for China's industrial offensive in Western Europe. While the European Union attempted to erect protective trade barriers by imposing heavy punitive tariffs of up to 38% on Chinese-made electric cars to shield domestic manufacturers in Germany and France, the UK government chose a radically different path. Constrained by aggressive environmental regulations, most notably the zero-emission vehicle mandate that severely penalises car manufacturers with crippling fines for every non-electric car sold above strict annual quotas, London kept its commercial borders wide open. This regulatory squeeze created the most fertile and lucrative environment in the Western world for Oriental EV expansion. The practical consequence of this policy was an unprecedented wave of maritime logistics. In less than 36 months, colossal cargo vessels operated by Chinese state-owned shipping lines began unloading continuously at major British ports such as Southampton, Bristol, and Liverpool. Brands like MG, now fully owned and engineered by Chinese state giant SAIC alongside BYD, Omoda, JQ, and Great Wall Motor, transformed almost overnight from obscure industry newcomers into dominant forces across corporate fleets, rental markets, taxi services, and private driveways across the country, yet focusing solely on cars that proudly display Chinese badges on their front grilles, misses the far more profound strategic picture. The true masterstroke executed by planners in Shenzhen and Beijing was not merely convincing Western drivers to buy unfamiliar Chinese brands, but making established Western and Japanese manufacturers entirely reliant on Chinese technology to remain operational. As we watch these vehicles stream off the docks and onto British roads, it is worth pausing to consider the sheer scale of the economic machinery driving this shift. Take a moment to subscribe to the channel right now. It is the single best way to ensure you stay ahead of the curve as these monumental industrial shifts continue to unfold. The underlying reason why Toyota felt compelled to bow before Chinese industrial capability stems from a dramatic technological asymmetry that very few analysts in the West anticipated. Developing a bespoke electric vehicle platform from scratch, complete with dedicated electronic architecture, integrated software, intelligent thermal management, and high-density battery packs, demands astronomical capital expenditure running into billions of pounds, alongside a development cycle that typically spans 4 to 5 years within the bureaucratic confines of traditional car makers. When Toyota introduced its first purpose-built electric models to the British market, the real-world performance under cold weather conditions was met with sharp criticism. Motorists and motoring journalists reported severely degraded driving ranges, sluggish rapid charging speeds, software glitches, and elevated manufacturing costs that made the vehicles commercially unviable against Chinese opposition. Facing the unrelenting pressure of the UK's ZEV mandate, which threatens fines of up to £15,000 per excess petrol or diesel vehicle sold, Toyota's executive board in Nagoya confronted an existential crisis. Spending another half-decade and billions more in capital to develop a competitive in-house battery ecosystem meant accepting catastrophic losses and relinquishing market share in the UK and Europe. The pragmatic alternative was to admit defeat in immediate battery development and purchase off-the-shelf technology from the entity that had systematically monopolized the global EV supply chain from the mine to the assembly line. Toyota chose immediate commercial survival over pride. That turnkey solution was the revolutionary Blade battery, designed, patented, and manufactured by BYD. While Western and Japanese car makers treated electric vehicles as simple swaps of internal combustion engines for electric motors within legacy factory setups, BYD spent the last 2 decades constructing a vertically integrated empire with no equal in the West. BYD is far more than a car manufacturer. It owns direct stakes in lithium and cobalt mining operations across South America and Africa, operates chemical refining plants, fabricates its own automotive-grade semiconductors, manufactures cutting-edge lithium iron phosphate cells, and even owns its own fleet of oceanic car carrier ships. This absolute control over every link in the supply chain grants BYD a structural cost advantage of 30 to 40% over any European or Japanese competitor. The Blade battery itself is not merely cheaper to manufacture. Its cobalt-free chemistry and elongated structural cell design make it fundamentally safer and thermally stable. It comfortably survives extreme nail penetration tests and crushing forces that would cause conventional Western nickel-manganese-cobalt batteries to suffer violent thermal runaway. When Toyota's senior engineers disassembled and benchmarked BYD's battery pack and integrated drive units, they were forced to confront a sobering reality. Shenzhen was nearly a decade ahead of anything Toyota had ready for mass production. This humbling revelation birthed the commercial agreement that is quietly reshaping British roads. On the assembly lines, producing the latest electric saloons and crossovers destined for UK showrooms, Toyota mounts its iconic 3-ellipse badge on the nose, installs its familiar steering wheel, and finishes the cabin to traditional Japanese standards. But remove the steel bodywork, and the structural battery pack is BYD. The primary electric drive motor is BYD. The power inverter, thermal management system, and charging control software were all engineered in Shenzhen. In the finance documentation signed at a pristine dealership in London or Manchester, the customer sees the reassuring Toyota nameplate. Underneath, Toyota has effectively become a coach builder for BYD's underlying hardware. This arrangement triggers a devastating domino effect across the British automotive manufacturing base. Historic assembly plants across the UK, such as Nissan's massive complex in Sunderland, Stellantis facilities in Ellesmere Port and Luton, and the mini plant in Oxford, are caught in a perilous economic vice. They are attempting to compete in a market governed by stringent local regulations while relying on a European supply chain that remains fragmented, expensive, and technologically lagging. When these manufacturers witnessed Toyota, a company renowned for its unmatched balance sheet and manufacturing prowess, admitting it cannot build a competitive EV without Chinese assistance, the illusion of Western industrial self-sufficiency completely shatters. The impact on traditional British component suppliers in industrial heartlands like the West Midlands is profound. Local engineering firms that supported generations of skilled manufacturing jobs cannot possibly match the scale and cost structure of fully automated, state-subsidized mega-factories in southern China, operating with direct access to refined raw materials and domestic energy advantages. As legacy manufacturers increasingly source complete electric powertrains from Asia, the UK's domestic supply chain faces systemic erosion. The geopolitical ramifications extend far beyond the question of which car badge sits on a family driveway. The automotive industry has long served as the primary engine of manufacturing, employment, research and development, and technological prestige for Western economies. Losing native control over vehicle propulsion and battery chemistry means surrendering industrial sovereignty and critical intellectual property. Modern electric vehicles are not simple mechanical machines. They are mobile data platforms fitted with high-definition cameras, radar sensors, telemetry systems, and connected software. Allowing the digital and physical architecture of these vehicles to be designed and controlled by Chinese tech giants creates long-term strategic dependencies that touch on national infrastructure and data security. Industry commentators often attempt to downplay the Toyota-BYD partnership as a temporary stopgap, suggesting it merely bridges the gap until Toyota's heralded solid-state batteries arrive in the 2030s. However, this narrative overlooks the realities of industrial momentum. Every pound transferred to BYD to purchase ready-made batteries directly funds BYD's relentless research and development, further cementing its technological lead. Meanwhile, internal engineering capabilities within legacy car makers risk atrophying through disuse. As the technological gap widens, temporary outsourcing threatens to become permanent dependency. Attempts by Western governments to stem this tide through tariffs or trade restrictions often prove ineffective against a fully integrated supply chain. If tariffs are imposed on finished vehicles imported from China, Chinese firms simply supply batteries, motors, and software licenses directly to Western brands building cars locally. If local content rules are tightened, Chinese battery titans build gigafactories within Europe or the UK, bringing their supplier networks with them. China understood that true power in the energy transition lies not in stamping sheet metal, but in controlling battery chemistry, raw material processing, and power electronics. For the British consumer facing economic pressures and high living costs, practical considerations inevitably outweigh abstract geopolitical concerns. When a car offers superior real-world range, faster charging, modern technology, and an accessible price point, drivers will choose value over origin. Chinese strategists anticipated this consumer behavior, knowing that market demand would ultimately override political rhetoric. China's conquest of the British automotive landscape did not require military force or overt diplomatic confrontation. It was achieved through industrial foresight, scale, and technical execution. The door to the British market was not broken down from the outside. It was opened from within by legacy manufacturers seeking immediate solutions to regulatory mandates they could not meet alone. Toyota's partnership with BYD is not an isolated event, but a clear signal of a shifted global order. And if you believe this shift is confined to Toyota and BYD, the broader European landscape tells an even more dramatic story. Behind closed doors, legacy giants across Germany and France, including Volkswagen, Stellantis and Renault, have quietly signed similar multi-billion-pound agreements with Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers and battery makers to salvage their own low-cost EV programs. Subscribe to the channel now and click the video appearing on your screen right now to uncover how European car-making icons are surrendering their platforms to China in a desperate bid to survive.